everybody and welcome back to my channel. You're watching Indigo Tech Tutorials. And in this video, I'm going to show you how you can deploy your Ruby on Rails 8 application to a production server. This is going to be super easy because of all of the new additions in Rails 8, including the Kamal library, which makes deploying your Rails apps very, very simple in today's Rails world. So yeah, we're just going to get straight into it. The dependencies that you're going to need for this before we get started are Ruby installed and Ruby on Rails installed, of course, because that's the language we're going to be using for the web app. You're also going to need to have Docker installed on your computer, and we are going to use Dockerhub as the registry, which is where your Docker file is going to be stored while it's transported to the production server. So I'll cover that in a second. And then for the server that we're going to use, I'm going to use Hetzner, which is a popular server provider, and it's also pretty affordable. Even DHH uses that in his demos. So we're going to be using Hetzner, which is a server provider that I just started using, but it's pretty easy to set up. And another thing I'm going to cover is I ran into an issue when deploying my apps with Tailwind. There was an issue where like the styling was getting messed up when I deployed the app. So I'm going to show you guys how to fix that as well. So I hope you're all excited and let's get straight into it. So first of all, I'm going to go over to the terminal and I'm going to go in here and let's check and make sure that we have Ruby on Rails installed. So I'm going to type ruby-v and we have Ruby 3.4.4, which is the latest version of Ruby. I'm also going to check the Rails version by doing rails-v, and we are on Rails 8.0.2. which is also the latest version. So as long as you have like Ruby 3.4, I mean, you could probably do it on a later version on a previous version of Ruby, but really what's most important is if you have Rails 8, because that's what's going to have Kamal already set up so that we can deploy the app without much configuration, just a tiny little bit of configuration. So I'll show you guys exactly how to do this. First of all, I'm going to create a brand new Rails app. So I'm actually going to, first, let's go over to a new folder. I'm going to make a folder for my YouTube apps. Yeah, let's just call it YouTube apps. So let's go in here. And I'm going to make another directory for, actually, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to generate the app right here inside of YouTube apps. So let's generate the app, and to generate an app with Ruby on Rails, we're going to use the Rails new command. So just type Rails space new, and then we're going to put the name of our app. So for this, let's just call this deploy to Hetzner. And I'm also going to set the CSS framework to use Tailwind. Let's do -c Tailwind. And just like that, we can press enter, and it's going to go and generate our basic setup for our app. So I'll let this go through and do its thing. Bam, so just like that, we have a new Ruby on Rails app generated. So now I'm going to cd into this app. So I called it deploy to Hetzner. And then let's see if it's working by typing bin/dev to start the Rails server. And we're using bin/dev because I set Tailwind as the CSS framework. If you're not using Tailwind, it would just be Rails S. But now that we're using bin dev, let's go over to the browser. So I'm going to go over to Chrome. And then we can check out localhost :3000 and see if our app is working. So as long as you see a screen like this, which is the Rails default screen, you can be confident that your Rails app is working. So the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to replace this screen by setting a root to the app. So let's go back into the terminal, and I'm going to generate a basic pages controller where we're going to have a home page, and then we'll set that as the root of the app. So instead of showing this Rails screen, it'll show our page that we specify. So let's go back to the terminal, and I'm going to do a Rails G controller command. So just like this, we can say Rails G controller, and then we're going to put the name of the controller. I'm going to call it the pages controller. And then we can specify any actions that you want to have. So any pages, for example. So we're going to just say a home action, and then we'll press enter. This is going to generate the controller. It's also going to generate the views, and it's going to set up a default route. So now I'm going to open up our Rails app in a code editor, which I'm using VS Code. As of lately, I've been using VS Code a lot. And if you're new to coding, I would recommend you check out VS Code. It's pretty easy to use. Now I'm going to start the server just so that we have that running. And then we can go into the code. And I'm going to set the root for the app. So to do that, let's go over to the config. And inside of the config folder, we have the routes.rb file. This is where all of the routes inside of your app are. So whenever you have a new URL that you want to set up in your app, you're going to first define it inside of the routes. So as you can see, we have this default route for pages/home, but we don't want to use that route. So I'm just going to delete it. Instead, we're going to set the root. So we already have this commented out root down here. I'm just going to uncomment that by deleting the pound sign. And now we have the root. It's going to the post index. So I'm going to change this to go to the pages controller. So it's going to be like this: root pages pound sign home. So it's going to go to the home action. And just like that, we have set the root for our app. So if we go back to the browser and reload, you'll see that we're now on the home page. So real quickly, I'm just going to style this up a little bit nicer so we can see some Tailwind styling in action. And then we can get straight into deploying. So to style this up, I'm going to start by going to the app views. And first, I'm going to go to the layouts application layout. And because when you use Tailwind in a Rails app, it adds this container, which like adds padding around it. I'm just going to delete that padding real quick by deleting the container so that we just have the body and the yield inside of here. And the yield is where your page content is going to be placed. So if we reload, it'll get rid of all the padding, and now our content is just right up in the side, which is good. Now I'm going to style that home page by going to the views pages home file, and I'm just going to delete all the content for now. And I'm going to set up a very, very simple home page. So I'm going to start by doing a div. Let's add the class width full, height screen, and let's do an Indigo background because of course it's Indigo Tech Tutorials. So let's do an Indigo background. And then I'm going to add a flex call, item center, justify center class, which is going to center all of the content in the center, but it's also going to stack it on top of each other. So that's what the flex call is for. And now let's add an h1. So I'm going to add h1 with class text7xl. And I'm just going to put some text, let's say test Rails 8 deploy to Hetzner. So let's reload. This is what it looks like. That's not bad. And then we'll put a p tag underneath it. And created by Indigo Tech Tutorials. I'm going to try to use like some padding and some margin because those are the things that usually break with that glitch or that bug that I encountered. So let's just put like a button underneath this. So I'll do another div real quick. Some margin. And we'll put a button. We don't have any other pages right now, but we'll just do an empty button that says like get started now. And I'm gonna do a comma, and for the URL I'm just gonna put a pound signs just to keep it as a blank URL that like the link's not gonna go anywhere. And I'm gonna do the class here. I can actually define a little bit more button type of styling. Let's do a pink button because why not? Can do some border styling. And let's see how that looks. So yeah, we got a little pink button. We can even add a hover effect. Whoops. But yeah, it's not necessary. I just want to make sure that all the styling still works once we get this live. Okay, so yeah, we have this basic, simple homepage. Ooh, I kind of want to center that text real quick. Let's do text center, Might as well do it on all of the text just to make sure that it stays centered. So yeah, that's probably fine for now. We just have a basic home page, and we could probably add one more page just to make sure that the navigation works. So let's go to the app controllers, pages controller, and let's add another route. Just call this like about. So now we have the about action here. We're also going to need to set the root. So let's go to config roots.rb. And now we need to define a get root for the /about. And this is going to go to the pages about action. So that should work. And now we just need to finally to add the view. So in the views pages folder, we can add a new file called about.html.erb. And I'm just going to go and copy the home page, and I'll just get rid of the link. Say like this is the about page. Actually, you know what? I'll leave the link because that can be a back button. Say back to home page. And then this can just go, instead of the pound sign, we'll put /, which will make it go back to the root of the app. And I'll just say this is the about page. All right, let's just do it like that. So you can say get started now. This still is not going anywhere, so let's go to the home page. And instead of going to the pound sign, we're going to go to /about, which will go to that URL. And as you can see, this is the about page. The URL changes and everything. So this is a very, very simple app. It's not even really an app. It's just 2 pages, but still, it's a Ruby on Rails app. And now I want to show you guys how we can deploy this to production, which is what all you guys are interested in if you clicked on this video. And this should work the same with all of your apps. But we are using defaults, by the way. We're using SQLite, so it's going to be a little bit different if you're using PostgreSQL. I'll probably make future videos on how to deploy with PostgreSQL. But for right now, this is just how to deploy with all the defaults, which is the built-in libraries that are included in Rails 8. So let's get into deploying. So what we're going to need for deploying our app, like I said, you need to have Docker installed on your computer. So make sure you have Docker installed. Also make sure that it's running. You're also going to need a Dockerhub account. So if you don't have a Dockerhub account, you can just look up Dockerhub, go to this website, and then create an account. And this is where your Docker images are going to be stored while you are deploying. And I think DHH said he wants to get rid of the need for Dockerhub, and I think even Docker images themselves. But for right now, we use Dockerhub to store the images. So what you need to do is once you create your Dockerhub account, you need to go to Dockerhub and you're going to grab an access token. So let's go to account settings. Now we're going to go to personal access tokens. Right, so let's generate a token for this video. I'm just going to call this test deploy to Hetzner Rails 8. You can also set an expiration date if you want, and then we can set the access permissions. Now, I don't really remember what permissions you need. It might just be read and write, but I'm going to do read, write, and delete. So let's just do that. Although that probably is not a great idea because then people could access all of the repositories. But anyways, I'm just going to use read, write, and delete. And I'm going to generate. And this is what it's going to look like. You're going to grab this token down here. So let's just copy that. And then I'm going to go over to back to our app. And we're going to need to store this somewhere. Well, actually, that wasn't the app. So let's go back here. And I'm going to store this in a temporary file. So I'm going to create a new file called .env. And you got to be careful with .env because this actually gets loaded into your Rails app if you don't comment out the stuff. So I'm going to stick this in here, and the key that you usually use is Kamal registry password. So I'm just going to set that up already so we have this ready to go, but make sure that it's commented out so it's not actually getting applied to your environment whenever you start your app. But this is usually what I do is I just store my credential files here. And if you look in .gitignore, the env file is already ignored, so when you're pushing this to GitHub, you can be sure that your .env file is not getting pushed. You could probably store that somewhere else as well, but that's just how I've been doing it recently. Okay, so now we have a Dockerhub key, which is great. We also have Dockerhub running on our computer, so that's good. The next thing that we're going to need is, let's go over to our Kamal, our .kamal folder, and then let's go to the secrets file. So inside of the secrets file, this is where you're going to pass your environment variables into Kamal. So first of all, you'll see that the Kamal registry password is getting passed in from the environment variable. This is how you pass it in. You have to set it to whatever environment variable it is and then use the $sign. Now the reason why you need to use this secrets file is because I guess to pass the credential over to Kamal, we need to do this for whatever reason. It doesn't know about the environment variables that you pass in unless you set it here. You'll also notice that we're passing in the Rails master key down here, and by default it's using this command to grab it from the master key. So what I usually do is, instead of grabbing it from there, I'm going to generate a, well, first of all, I don't even think we have, I guess we do have a master key, config master.key, but if you generate a credentials file, it automatically overrides the master key, and Rails doesn't use this master key anymore. At least that's what I've noticed. And usually in the Rails apps, you're going to just use a credentials file to store your credentials. So that's what we're going to do first of all, is we're going to generate that credentials file. And I'll show you guys how to do that. So if you go into our terminal, we're going to need to specify the editor first. So we have to do this environment variable editor equals vim, vi, or if you want to use any other terminal text editor, you can. Unfortunately, you can't use VS Code because it's a standalone app. You have to use one that's accessible in the terminal, at least as far as I know and I've experimented with. So let's set the editor, and then we're going to do Rails command space credentials :edit, and then we're going to specify the environment. So I'll do -- environment equals production, and this is going to generate our production credentials file. And here's where you'd store any secure credentials that you want to use in your app. For example, API keys for like AWS or Google. So you don't have to put anything here for now, but I can just show you guys what that looks like. So like whatever you put in here is now secure. It also has the secret key base. And like I said, when we write out of here, it also creates this config credentials production.key, and that's the key that Rails uses as your master key after you generate a credential file. So it is kind of weird how they do that. It'll totally ignore the config master.key, at least in my experience. But this is what I usually do. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go to config credentials production.key, and we're going to grab that value of the key. And then I'm going to go over to the .env file, and here's where I'm going to stick the Rails master key environment variable, and I'll set this to the value. So now let's go back to the .kamal folder in the secrets file, and I'm going to change this Rails master key credential. Instead of loading from this command, we're going to load from the environment variable. And I'm also going to move this over here. So now we're loading both of these from the environment variable. And what's going to happen is whenever we run our Kamal commands, we'll just copy these environment variables into our terminal and run the whole command with the environment variables. And that will pass it through the whole process. Okay, so we have a little bit of that set up. Now I'm going to show you guys the config deploy file. So we haven't even looked at this yet, but this is the deploy file that your app is going to use when you deploy. It's going to look at this, and here's where you configure your Kamal deploy. So all the stuff, like we have the server. So this is going to be the web server that you're going to use for whatever server that you purchase. This is the IP address. You're going to set this here. And then we're also going to set the SSH key. So somewhere in here we have the SSH key. down here, so you can SSH into the app and use a certain key. Another thing that we're going to notice is the image. So this image is the Docker image that you're going to use, that like the name of the image that you're going to store it as. So usually you can just leave this by default. So whatever you named your app, it's going to already have it here. But for the your user part, you need to put your username. So for me, I have my username for my Dockerhub account. If you need to find that, you could just go back to Dockerhub. And it'll be right here. So right in the URL, it'll also be like right over here. And it'll also be right here. So you can just copy that username. And then we're going to go and paste in our username, first of all. Just paste that in. And then for now, on our initial deploy, we're not going to have a host name or anything. And by default, the proxy is set up for a URL. So if you want this to work on your first deploy just to an IP address, we're going to comment out this proxy section. And then once we do set it up with our domain, we can uncomment this. So I'm kind of just doing a little bit of configuration before we even get into the server part, because we're going to have to go and get a Hetzner server next. So we have this commented out. Another part I'm going to go comment out is inside of the config environments production.rb. So inside of here, we have two lines which are forcing SSL in your app. And we're going to comment out both of these. So we're going to comment out assume SSL and force SSL just for now. But once we add the domain again, we're going to uncomment this. If you don't uncomment this, then it's going to expect an SSL. It's going to expect you to be making a request with the HTTPS instead of HTTP. But for an IP address, you can't have an SSL certificate. You can only have an SSL certificate for a domain. So that's why we need to temporarily comment this out. All right, so we got these things in order. So we're getting close to the point where we can go and get the Hetzner server. Another thing you need to know with Kamal is that all of your files need to be committed to GitHub before you push, or else they're going to be ignored. At least that's how I've been familiar with it. So that means you need to have a GitHub repository to store your app. Well, I guess you don't need a GitHub repository, but you just need to store it with Git, which those are two different things, by the way. So I guess you also need to have Git installed on your computer. That's another prerequisite. If we check our Git status, we have all these files, so we're going to end up adding these. I'm going to just push this to a GitHub repository anyways, because I want to share the source code on YouTube afterwards. So let's first of all go to GitHub, and I'm going to create a new repository. I'm just going to call this test deploy to Hetzner. Deploying a Rails app to Hetzner. Rails 8 TailwindCSS, and I'll make this public. And once we create this, it'll give us this block of code, which makes things a little bit easier. So we don't have to write these one by one to set up like the origin for the GitHub repository. So I'm going to copy that, drop it in here. This is going to set up our app, but we still have all of our files that aren't committed. So I have to do a git add dot command to add all of our files. And let's do a git commit -m, and -m is for the commit message. We'll just say first commit, and then finally we'll do a git push to push all of our code to GitHub. Now if we run git status again, we are up to date with origin main, which means all of our files are committed, so that's good. And if we reload GitHub, you'll see that we do have the code up here on GitHub, so that's good. All right, so we got that taken care of. Now, what else do we need for deploying? We actually are pretty close. Another place you might see is the Docker file, but by default, you don't even need to mess with this. That's the greatest thing, is because of Kamal being built in, because of the Docker file already being set up when you create a new app, if you're using the defaults, this is already good to go. You don't need to change anything. Now, the Docker file is where it's going to have like custom code that's going to run during the deploy process. So later on, once you add dependencies and like libraries, like let's say you have a CLI tool that you use in your app, for example, FFmpeg for processing videos. You would want to set this here. So in this like sudo apt get command, we can set our packages that we need to add here. So that's one thing, but like we don't even need to mess with this right now because it's already set up for us. All right, so let's move on. And now we're at the point where we can go and get the Hetzner server. Let's go in the browser and go over to Hetzner. So should already be logged in. I guess I'm not logged in, so I'm going to log in. Of course, I need to do the one-time password because it is secure. Okay, so now that we're in Hetzner, I'm going to create a new project, and I'm going to call this test deploy Rails 8 app. Let's do add project, and I'm going to go inside of here. And inside of here, inside of the project, you can create your servers. So that's what we're going to do is we're going to create a server. So let's click add server, and we can set the location for our server. So depending on where your app is going to be, you usually want to get the server that's closest to you or your user base. So for me, I'm just going to use US East Coast. And then for the image, you can choose whichever image you want to use. I recommend Ubuntu because Ubuntu is the most supported, although all of these should work, but I know Ubuntu is probably the best option if you don't want to run into any issues. Let's choose that. Next, you're going to have to choose the type. So whether you want a dedicated CPU or shared CPU, and a shared CPU is going to be a lot cheaper. So let's go with shared. You'll see the prices right here. So like the cheapest shared CPU is $5 a month, but a dedicated CPU, the cheapest is $15 a month. So let's go with shared CPU because that's cheaper. And it should be able to, like for a simple web app, a shared CPU should work great. But if you have like high CPU usage, for example, that's why they say you should have a dedicated CPU. We should be fine with shared. Like I said, we're going to use the cheapest server, which is pretty good. Like it has 2 vCPUs, 2 gigabytes of RAM, and a 40 gigabyte SSD, and also 1 terabyte of traffic, which sounds like a lot. Yeah, for $5 a month, that sounds like a pretty good deal. And for a simple Rails app, it should not use very much RAM, by the way. So 2 gigabytes of RAM should be plenty enough, at least for your apps for like a while until you start scaling them to a lot of users. Then you can move to $10 a month server. All right, and then for networking, we can just leave this default. We'll have an IP address. So interestingly, they cost, what is that? Like 1/10 of a cent per hour. So I guess that's where that price comes in. It's only 60 cents a month, so I guess we'll just leave that. It's not too bad. And then the next part we're going to get to is the SSH key. So your SSH key is how you're going to connect to the server. So you do need to have an SSH key. And if we click add SSH key, it's just going to ask for the content of your SSH key. So we do have to generate an SSH key on our computer. So let's go back into the terminal, and I'm going to open up a new tab, and I'm going to cd into just our main directory. And I'm going to generate a brand new SSH key. Now you guys are probably going to want to organize your SSH keys, so we might want to cd into the .ssh file, which is usually where you store your SSH keys. So you can cd into it like this with the ~/.ssh. So now we're in the actual SSH file, which is probably a better place to organize your keys. I usually just stick them right in my home folder, but you might want to organize them like this. So this is where I suggest you put it. And then we're going to generate a brand new SSH key by typing ssh-keygen. And when you do that, it's going to say enter file in which to save the key. So we need to put the name of our key. Let's just call this test Hetzner deploy. And then you can put your passphrase, or you can leave it empty, but if you want it to be super secure, put a password on your SSH key. I'm just going to leave it blank. We're going to press enter, and then boom, you have your SSH key generated. And I'm guessing it's in this file. I might not have done this right. So I'm going to cd out. Let's try to cat the content. So if we do //.sh/ test Hetzner deploy. Oh, we do get it. So I did do it right. It was in the right folder. So this is your SSH key. And I think what we do is we just, I can't remember. I think you're almost supposed to grab like the public key, right? So I think you drop in the public key. So make sure that you want to cat the paths to your key, but then .pub to grab the public one. This is the private one, which you're going to use to actually SSH into the server. And your server is going to have the public one. So let's click add SSH key. And we now have our SSH key set up. And then we're going to get to the volumes part. So this means if you want additional storage on your server, we don't need that. So let's skip it. Let's skip the firewall, skip the backups, skip basically all of these. Actually, we can skip everything. And then if you want to set the name, instead of just having like Ubuntu, whatever, let's call this test deploy Rails 8 app. And boom, just like that, we have set up our Hetzner server. So I'm going to go ahead and buy the server for $5. And then we can wait until this sets up, but we don't really have to wait because look, we already have the public IP address. So let's copy that IP address and we can go and stick it in our deploy file. So let's go back to our app in VS Code and I'll go over to config deploy.yml. And then right here in the server's web, where we have this default IP address, I'm going to paste in our new IP address for the Hetzner app, or the Hetzner server where we're going to stick our app. And we're pretty close. So now that we have this going, I think the last part that we need to set is the SSH settings. So like I said, when you SSH into the app, you're going to use that key. And actually, we're going to set this down here. But first of all, I'm going to SSH into the app manually because we have to do one configuration step. So let's make sure that our app is set up. It looks like it's still loading. I'm going to reload because it should set up pretty fast. So it looks like, yep, it's already good. So let's try to SSH into our server manually to make sure that everything's working. So we can go back over here into the console and to SSH into our server, we're going to do SSH command. And then we're going to do -I, which is going to be for the password. So we have to put the path to that password, which is the //.sh/ test Hetzner deploy. And we're going to use the regular key, not the public one. And then let's do a space. And we're going to do root, because it's going to be the root user at the IP address. And that is how you SSH into a remote server. So I'm going to press enter. It's going to ask, are you sure you want to continue connecting? We're going to say yes. And now it's going to also add the IP address to the known host. Boom. You can now see that we're logged into the app because in the bottom left corner, we have the root user at the name of the app. So we are inside the server right now. Yeah, it's pretty cool. We're inside of a server. Now, the one configuration step that I was mentioning is we have to go look up Kamal SSH. And the first thing you'll see is this SSH configuration page. And what we're going to do is it says you may need to bootstrap your servers manually before using them with Kamal. Now, I guess that's if you're using a non-root user. We actually are using a root user, but just in case you guys aren't using a root user, you're going to have to manually run this code, which whenever I deployed to like AWS, they give you a Ubuntu user to log in with instead of root. So I would usually have to use this step. I'm just going to run it anyways, just to make sure that everything's working. Now, the one thing we do have to change is the user mod. So as you can see, it's giving access to the Docker folder to app, which is not the name of our user. So to use our name of our user, we can do $user. which we already know it's root, but if you don't know the name of your user, you could do this $user, which is going to pull out the user that you're logged in as. No, press enter, and what this is going to do is it's going to install these libraries, Docker, curl, git, and then it's going to give access to the machine to access Docker. So if you're getting like an issue that says like permission denied with Docker, it's probably because you didn't run this code, and you just have to manually SSH in, run this code, and make sure that instead of app, it's the name of your user, like I showed. Yeah, it looks like everything's working great. It was able to install Docker. And let's just exit out. And we should be able to do our deploy very soon. There's just one last step. Remember, we have to set the SSH settings inside of our deploy file. So I'm going to uncomment this, and we're going to have the SSH key with the user. Our user is going to be root. Then we're going to pass in the keys, which will be an array of keys. And then we'll do a string inside of here, and we're going to use the path to our key, which is the ~/.ssh/test. It's funny, now I forgot the name of the key. Test Hetzner deploy. So like this. That's the SSH key. And I think that's it. So now we can see if this works. I think we might have to commit this. Let's check git status. We do have a new change to the deploy, so let's git add git commit -m. For the message, I'll say config Kamal deploy. And let's push that up. And then finally, we can test our deploy out. So the first time that you run Kamal deploy, you're going to run Kamal setup, which will set up everything that you need. But like I said, we need to grab our environment variables. So whenever we run the command, we're going to have to pass in our environment variables. That's why I stored them in .env, because it's easy to go and grab them. So I'm going to grab our Kamal registry password, plop that in, and I'm going to grab our Rails master key, and I'm going to plop that in. And then finally, we have the Kamal setup command, and then I'm going to press enter, and this is going to start our Kamal setup, which is our first deploy on this brand new app. And if we're lucky, this will work the first time. I think I did everything right, but you never know. So we're just going to let this go through and see if everything works successfully. All right, so it looks like the deploy process went through successfully. There wasn't any errors, and it finished in about 300 seconds. So that means that we should be able to access our app now at this IP address. So let's go and see if that works. So we can copy the IP address, go into the browser, and let's go to http:// the IP address, and boom, as you can see, our app is deployed. I can see that there is an issue with Tailwind. So this is what I was talking about before. See how the padding and margin is all messed up? Like our content is squished together. The button doesn't look right compared to our local version. And if you actually had like spent a lot of time building a whole design for your app, you would notice it a lot more because everything would be all messed up. That's what happened to me. I was really frustrated. I didn't know what was happening. So I'll show you guys how to fix that. And it is very, very easy. Also, shout out to the guy on Reddit who actually helped me. I posted my issue in the Rails forum, and he did respond with the answer. So shout out to him. So to fix this, we're going to go to our Docker application. It's actually a problem with Docker. That's why the issue was happening. I thought it was like an issue with Tailwind, but no, it's with Docker. So let's go over to our Docker app. Let's go to settings. And what we're going to do is inside of this general tab, let's scroll down, and we have to go to the virtual machine options. So by default, it's going to be using Rosetta with the Apple virtualization framework. And it turns out when you do this, it breaks your Tailwind Kamal deploys. So let's unclick that Rosetta, and let's switch over to Docker VMM. And then we're going to click apply and restart. And as soon as I did this, it fixed my issue with the Tailwind deploys. I don't know if this is like a new thing with Docker. I actually need to upgrade my Docker, so that might also be a thing. But when you change it over to Docker VMM, I think you can also use the legacy one, but I'm going to do the new one because that did work for me. Once you do that, if you deploy again, your Tailwind styling should be fixed. So let's just literally just do a deploy again. And now that we're deploying for the second time, now that our app is all set up, instead of running the Kamal setup command, we're going to run Kamal deploy command. So hopefully you can see this. I'm going to clear out my console real quick. So we'll do Kamal space deploy. And we're going to do that to deploy again. And this time it should fix any issues with the Tailwind styling that we were having before. So I'm just going to let this run through this real quick and verify that this fix works. Okay, so it looks like it finished deploying. And this time it was a lot faster, in only 60 seconds. And that's because Docker does some sort of caching, which speeds things up on any deploy after the first one. Let's go ahead and reload and make sure that our code is fixed. For whatever reason, it doesn't look like it's fixed, even though we changed the settings. So I'm guessing because it cached the file, maybe it didn't update everything. So we're gonna need to try to get it to not use the cache. So we might have to make a quick change to the Docker file. I'm just gonna delete one of these empty spaces. I think whenever you change the Docker file, it has to redo the whole process. So just deleting a space, that doesn't affect any of the code, but it'll make it have to reload the whole Docker file. Hopefully that'll fix it. So I'm going to add this change. For the commit message, I'll say try to reload Docker file. And hopefully, if we do Kamal deploy again, I'm hoping that this fixes it. Yeah. Hopefully that does it. I'm not even sure. If it doesn't, then yeah, I'm gonna have to figure out what's going on. Okay, it just finished deploying again. I'm gonna go back in the browser, reload. Nothing changed, so I was worried about that. Now another idea I had is maybe our browser is caching this page. So what we can do is we can try to go to incognito and go back to the URL. And we're going to continue. Nope, we still have the weird styling issue. That's strange. So we're going to have to figure out how to get around this. Why is it still not working? So like for me, doing the Docker thing usually worked. I'm going to try to actually like quit out and reopen Docker entirely. Also, at the same time, I'm going to go to the home page and I'll make a quick change to some CSS to maybe see if that is affecting anything. So let's change the button from pink to purple. There's like some lag on my computer right now. I guess it's because Docker is starting. So I'm going to quickly start the app, make sure that our button is purple. So let's restart. Come on. Okay, we have a purple button. As you can see, this is what it looks like locally. This is what it looks like on the production app. There's like a weird Tailwind styling thing. So I need to fix that before I end this video. So let's add our new changes. Do git add dot, git commit -m, and for the message we'll say change button to purple. And I'll push the code. And finally we're gonna redeploy. And I'm hoping that this works this time. So let's do Kamal deploy. And yeah, hopefully this works after restarting Docker and doing a little CSS change. Let's see. All right, we just finished another deploy, and I'm hoping that this time the styling is fixed. There we go. Let's go, everybody. So it looks like it fixed. One thing I noticed is this deploy took a lot longer than the other ones. So I think restarting the Docker app was probably what fixed it. As you can see, the styling is fixed. So if you guys are having that issue, like I said, the way that we fixed that is we went to Docker desktop app, we went to settings, and then we changed it from Apple virtualization to Docker VMM, and that is what fixes that bug. So boom, just like that, we have our Rails 8 app deployed to a production server. So we are just using the IP address right now. If we want to use a real domain, I'll show you guys how to use a domain real quick. So first of all, we're going to need to go and acquire a domain. You can use whatever domain provider you want to use. I'm not really going to recommend any. I have a bunch of domains on GoDaddy.com, so I'm going to use one of those for this test. But yeah, I really can't recommend any domain providers. There's a ton out there. So I'll just look around, see maybe which one has the best deal. So let's see which one I want to use. Let's use Procrastigate, which was a domain I got a while ago because I wanted to stop procrastinating, which is a good idea. So let's use this, and to set it up, we need to grab our IP address. So let's copy that IP address over here. And then what we need to do is we need to make these A tags forward over to our IP address. So really, we only have to change these top two fields, the A with the @ sign and the A with www. So let's go and edit this, point it over to our new IP address, and we just want the plain IP address, I think, not any slashes or anything. Oh, wait. I keep pasting on top of it. So let's save. We updated the first one, which the @ sign, that means the wildcard. So if you don't put any, or maybe it doesn't mean wildcard, I think it just means without a www, because we want to support both versions. And then we'll do the one with www. So we have both of those forwarding over to the same IP address for our app. Now this can take, I think it takes like up to 48 hours, so we might not be able to test this right away. Sometimes it does work though, so we can try to see if it works for us. So now that we have the domain forwarding to our IP address, we can go into our app and have our app know about the domain. So to do that, we'll go over to config deploy, and then right here at that proxy section that we commented out, we can uncomment this. So inside proxy, we're going to have SSL true. And the cool thing about Kamal is it's going to automatically create an SSL certificate for you, which historically you'd have to do this manually, which is like a whole process of commands you have to run on your server. It's going to do it automatically using the Let's Encrypt, well, it says it right up here, Let's Encrypt library. So the fact that they do that for you is just amazing. And then the host is going to be the domain name. Again, we want to support both www and just regular domain. So first of all, I already forgot what the domain is we use. Probably shouldn't have closed out of there. So let's go back to there, to our products. I know it was Procrastigate, but I had like two of them. I think it's just the full one. So this one right here. Let me make sure that we have the domain, the DNS. Okay, that's the right IP address. Let's grab the name of the app, or the name of the domain. Let's go back to VS Code. And we're going to need to, instead of setting host, singular host, we're going to set hosts with an S, plural. And we can go on a new line, and we'll do a dash. And we're going to put the first one, which is just the domain without the www. And we're going to do a second one with the www. So now we're going to support both of these versions. And it's going to generate an SSL certificate for both of these. So that is perfect. And then we can go back to config environments production.rb, and we can uncomment the lines which are going to make our app use SSL. So both of these, because now we have the SSL certificate. And yeah, just like that, we can redeploy. First of all, let's commit our new code. Let's do git add dot. And then we'll just call this setup domain and SSL. Push real quick. And then after pushing, let's redeploy with Kamal. And yeah, I'm hoping it just works right away. But like I said, it can take 24 to 48 hours to update on the domain side. So it's possible it doesn't work right away, but this was the correct way to do it. So even if it doesn't work, it'll work eventually. Basically, once GoDaddy.com starts forwarding the website to the IP address. But sometimes it does work right away, so we can just wait through this deploy and see if it does work. If not, it's okay. So that deploy just finished, and now we can see if the web URL does work. So I'm just going to try to go over to the domain, and let's see. So, I mean, look at that, it worked. But for some reason it says it's not secure. We do have the SSL certificate being generated, but that also does take a couple minutes. So even though it says not secure right now, I'm sure in a couple minutes, if we reload, it'll say secure. But this is crazy, it worked right away. We now have our domain available, our app available with the domain. As you can see, we can go to the regular domain. We can also go to the www. Now we're getting that error, but we're getting that security error, but like I said, it should get resolved right away. It's because the Let's Encrypt process, as you can see, yeah, when I go in incognito, it says connection is secured, so it's already been fixed. If we go back in regular, it says not secure, but I think it might just be because it's cached, because it was secure in incognito. There is a way to get rid of the cache, but as you can see, it is secure if we go to incognito. If we go to another browser, I'm sure if I open up Safari and just go over there in Safari, we don't see any security issue here. Yeah, boom, we have our app live. We have a domain pointing to the IP address. That's how you do it. All right, thank you guys for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed. Hope you were able to deploy your Rails app to production today and get everything set up. If you did run into any issues, feel free to comment them below and I will get back to you right away. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed. Like always, please like the video, subscribe. It'll help me out to grow this channel and to eventually make even higher quality videos, buy more equipment. Right now, I still haven't got paid from YouTube a single dollar, but eventually, hopefully this will turn into something bigger. And yeah, thanks for everybody who watches my videos though. Yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this one and stay tuned for future videos. You can turn notifications on too, so you get notified as soon as I drop a new video. Yeah, I'll see you guys around.